My name is Josh Dallin, and I am an extension faculty member in Box Elder County. I have been in Box Elder County for 4 years, and previous to that, I was at the state 4-H office on the Logan campus for a little over 5 years. And so I'm excited to be here with you and talk about chickens. Chickens is a fun thing that we do as a family, and has been a thing that we've done it in my family growing up as well. And so hopefully some of the things that we teach you today will be helpful tips. And again, you have any questions that are pressing that you'd like answered, please don't hesitate to type those into the chat. So wanted to talk about starting out with chicks. So right now seems to be the perfect time of year to want to get our chicks and get them started. And some of you may have already got your chicks, and some of you may be thinking about getting some. But generally right now, most of our local farm stores are carrying chicks, and there's also different catalogs and different brooding companies that have mass incubators and different things that you can order from. You can even get your chicks sent to you through the post office. You can actually pick them up via the post office, and they'll be delivered to you that way. Regardless of how you get your chicks, whether you go to the farm store or whether you get them sent to you through the mail, there are some fundamental things that you need to be prepared for. So one of the things that's important to note is that baby chicks, when they're small, they cannot generate enough heat to warm themselves. In a setting where you have a hen that's raising the chicks herself, you'll find that the chicks spend a lot of time underneath her, and she will brood them. She will have them underneath her, and her body heat will be sufficient for them to be warm and to thrive. For the chicks that we're raising that aren't on a hen, we need to make sure that we provide an adequate heat source. Now there's two different heat sources that are normally utilized. One being a 250 watt infrared light. Some people have asked me, do I need the red one or can I get a white one? It really doesn't matter. It just matters that it's a heat lamp and that it's present for them to be able to warm themselves if needed. They've also come out with some radiant heaters, and they are actually rather affordable. And they're all different kinds. Some of them lay more flat, some of them stand more erect, but they provide some really nice heat, and they tend to reduce the risk of fire. If you're going to use a 250 watt infrared light or a 250 watt heat lamp, you need to make sure that you have it properly secured so that it doesn't fall down and start your bedding on fire and potentially your garage or your home or wherever it is that you're brooding your chicks. So please make sure that you have that provided there. I'm going to show you a brooder ring or a brooder box example that you will have here in the next slide, but you can see parts and pieces of it. And what a brooder is a brooder is the place that the chicks are going to live. So it's essentially the box or the ring or the small pen, wherever it is that you're going to house those chicks as you are brooding them and getting them to a little bit further maturity. When you're setting up your heat, you want to make sure that there is enough space for the chicks to be able to get away from the heat if they're too hot, or move towards the heat if they're too cold. You want them to be able to self-select their own temperatures, and you need to have a box or a brooder that is big enough for them to be able to do that. Probably one of the most common mistakes that we find when I get questions about why aren't my chicks thriving or why are we having troubles, it's because they don't have enough room to be able to self-regulate on that temperature. So make sure that you give them enough space to where you can, even a simple way to test that is by just putting your hand down in that brooder box and moving it back and forth in the different areas. If you can feel a significant difference of temperature, that will allow those chicks to be able to self-regulate. The other thing that we're going to need inside of our brooder is we're going to need a watering system. This one right here is a bigger watering system. It's a self-watering system that uses gravity to fill this small little ring, if you can see that here on the slide. That keeps your chicks safe. It provides enough water that they can get a really good drink, but it also isn't deep enough that they could drown. So these little waters, you can find them at a local feed store. If you only have a couple of chicks, they have smaller ones. This one here in the picture is actually a gallon in volume. So this again is the type of watering system that you want for your brooder, just because of the size of the chicks. You can see the chicks right here, decent enough size that they aren't going to be able to drown themselves in this type of a setup. You're also going to want to have good quality chick feed that's in your brooder. This is a feeder that again uses gravity. You can fill this up to the top. The feed comes out here into these little slots and allows plenty of feed to always be available to the chicks in front of them. Some rule of thumb, if you're raising a broiler chick, which would be a meat chicken, would be to have a 22 to 24% protein chick starter and grower. If you're going to be raising a layer chick, you can get away with a 20 to 21% type of a protein feed. Generally, again, these are chick starters or growers, and the feed is presented in a crumble so that it's small enough for them to be able to eat it and digest it properly. Clean litter like pine shavings is recommended on the bottom of your brooder. And I highly recommend getting the pine shavings that are actually a little bit larger in diameter. You can see that these are more of a flake instead of the tiny shavings. And the reason that I suggest that is because sometimes those tinier shavings allow for slippage underneath, and you can have chicks that will throw out a leg or cause harm on a joint of their leg without that stability underneath them. These are super easy. These pine shavings, they absorb a lot of the moisture, and they also are easy to clean. So those are some things to keep in mind. One last tip as we're starting out and we're preparing this brooder and getting everything ready for our chicks to come home. I've got a little picture here of some electrolyte package that's made specifically for poultry. It is recommended that for the first couple of days in that watering system that you have an electrolyte mix. It is not recommended that you have electrolytes for a long duration of time. Generally, when chicks arrive to you, they're somewhere between 24 and 48 hours of age. And you want to make sure that they get a really good start having that electrolyte boost and the feed boost. But after about maybe 2 or 3 days, you can just go back to straight water for them. All right, so here's an example of that brooder and from a top view. And one of the things that I really like about this brooder is I like that it is circular. I like that there's no corners. I like that there's a lot of room. You can see that you got some chicks over here that are colder, so they're wanting to get right under that heat lamp and be warm. You have others that are wanting to drink and some that are wanting to eat over here. You've got this little chick right here that's stretching and must be in its optimal zen right there. Okay, so again, doesn't have to be right underneath that heat lamp, but again, enough room that they have the ability to self-regulate. The other thing that's nice about a circular brooder, if you are able to raise your chicks in one, is it doesn't have any corners. Sometimes if chicks get cold, like if a lamp happens to go out or something happens, they might find themselves migrating towards a corner, and you can have issues because they'll pile on one another to stay warm. And if they're in a corner, they can oftentimes risk suffocation because of the lack of ability to get out of the corner. So that's just a little tip. If possible, round is better, but I do know people that will only have a couple of chicks and maybe put them in a large tote or something. That will work. This is just maybe the best recommendation for you. So now we're going to talk a little bit about all the possibilities as far as chicks are concerned. So which breed should you get? So I ask the question always when somebody's talking with me about chickens is what is your intention for chickens? Are you raising them for meat? Are you raising them to have egg producers? Or are you just doing it because you want some really cool, fun looking chickens? So in regards to meat chickens, you're almost always going to find what they call a Cornish cross. So if you go to a local farm store, you look into your poultry ordering magazines, they might even just call them Cornish cross. They might not even tell you what that cross is. But most always it's going to be a Cornish and a New Hampshire, or a Cornish and a Plymouth Rock type of a cross. Okay, and again, these are meat chickens, and they're a short-term project. On average, your meat chickens are going to reach harvesting weight at about 10 to 13 weeks. So it's a very short process. They grow very quickly. They're great eaters as far as their food consumption. And then again, that harvesting time frame is going to be about 10 to 13 weeks. Now, one of the things that you need to be aware of when you are raising these types of meat chickens is that at 10 to 13 weeks, that is really when you need to plan on harvesting them. And so be mindful of when you are planning to get them, because they can have detrimental effects if they are not harvested in that time frame, one of which is they can be prone to having heart attacks and heart failure issues if they go much longer than that. So you have to be really careful about that. Okay, we do have a question really quickly. It says from Brandy, she says, are there benefits for the chickens and chicks to be together but separate while brooding? So are you, I'm assuming that you're going to be referring to like your adult chickens and your chicks. The adult chickens, if they are not raising those chicks, it's better that they're separated. If they are, as they get older and more mature, and even probably up to about almost laying age is when you might want to allow them to be mingled together. What I really like to do, if I can have two separate pens, but maybe has like a wire fence or a chain link fence or something where they can be right next to one another, but not in the same pen, that allows for kind of a pecking order to be established, and there's less problems with them being harmed if you're transitioning them into the coop with the larger chickens. So I hope that answers your question. But generally, I like to keep them away. There tends to be a pecking order with those older hens, and until they're old enough to be able to fend for themselves, you have to be pretty careful when it comes to intermingling them with the adults. All right. So laying hens come in many different breeds. The laying hens, unlike the meat hens, are going to take, as we talked about, on average 5 to 7 months before you're going to start seeing egg production. And so that's just something to consider. You'll get those little pullets. They'll start to feather out generally about 3 to 4 weeks. And then when they're fully feathered, that's when they can start to self-regulate the temperature. Remember, we talked about the heater situation in the brooder and how that's vital. Generally, when they're fully feathered, as long as we're not having extremely bitter cold outside, you can place them. You can start to place them and transition them into a different pen that is not your brooder. We were able to get some of our pullets this year, the first part of March, and we've got them outside now. But where the temperatures have been dropping below freezing, we've still kept a lamp out available to them if they would like in their larger pen. But I would assume here in the next couple of weeks, when the temperatures are going to start to rise above freezing, and especially as the pullets continue to grow, we'll go ahead and pull that lamp out. The last type of breed that I wanted to talk about, we talked about, are you just doing this for a hobby? They have what are called bantam breeds, and these are miniature versions of larger chickens, and they're a lot of fun. They're really tiny. You can find some bantams that are really, really tiny, and they're absolutely beautiful. They will lay eggs, but they're also little tiny eggs, just like the chicken is. And so oftentimes people will have these bantams for showing, to take to the fair or take to a chicken show, or just for fun to have around the house. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about some breeds that are available and give you an idea of what they look like. So here are some American breeds, the Jersey Giant, the New Hampshire, the Rhode Island Red, the Barred Plymouth Rock, and then the Wyandotte, okay? Right now, the Wyandottes are really a hot chicken. People really are liking them, and they come in all sorts of colors. They have a gold, this one right here would be a gold laced Wyandotte. They have a silver laced Wyandotte. And then they also have a blue laced Wyandotte. And they've also done some crossing. The new really, really hot one is what they call a blue red laced Wyandotte. And we actually have a couple of those, and they're really, really pretty. Very, very popular breeds. All of these American breeds right here are generally easily obtainable. You can grab them in a farm store, or again from a poultry ordering catalog, and they're very prolific in their laying. In just a minute, we're going to go over the egg colors that they will lay. I've got a little diagram that I'll show you. Here's some Asiatic breeds: the Brahma, the Cochin, and the Langson. They're also pretty popular. The Cochin specifically, you can find them fairly easily here in Utah. The Cochins are what my kids love the most. So we'll have a buff blonde colored Cochin and a blue Cochin all the time in our coop, just because that's what my kids really, really enjoy. They love how fluffed out they are, and they love the feathers on their feet. So it gives you an example of what those Asiatic breeds look like. Here's some Continental breeds. We have the Hamburg, the Luden, the La Flèche, Polish, and the Lakenvelder. Okay, these are the Polish and the Hamburg specifically, I know are easily obtainable here in Utah from feed stores or hatcheries. I think that the Polish is probably one of the more popular breeds as far as just a fun breed to have around. They get those crowned feathers on their heads, and they're a lot of fun to have in your coop, just as almost a conversation piece. Everybody thinks that those feathers are fun, and they come in all sorts of different colors. Now we have our Mediterranean breeds, okay? The Leghorn, which is probably one of the most prolific chickens that there is as far as maximum egg production. The Andalusian, which happens to be my favorite chicken. I'll always have 3 or 4 Andalusians, and there's no reason other than I just think they're pretty, and they lay a really big cream-colored egg, and they're extremely prolific. I just really love my Andalusians. In fact, here is an egg right here from my coop. If you can see me on the camera, you can see how big that Andalusian egg is right there. But I really like them. We've also had Ancanas, and they're a lot of fun. They're just a different color of a chicken, and more black with white specks. And they're also really prolific. The Mediterranean breeds by nature are going to be your highest egg producing types of chickens. Now here's some other really fun breeds. We have our Americanas and our Aracanas. Those are chickens that are going to lay the colored eggs. Sometimes you'll have a cross between those two, or a cross of those two with another breed, and they'll call those Easter eggers. But you can be able to get eggs that are this kind of a color of a green or a blue from these types of chickens, okay? You also have kind of your novelty, the frizzle here. The frizzle's feathers are all frizzled out, and they go in different directions. They're a lot of fun, a very popular breed to have. A naked neck chicken. These are kind of a turkey looking type of a chicken. I have some friends that have naked necks, and they say they lay really, really well. So those are just some examples of other breeds that you might find. Again, the Americanas, the Aracanas, or the crosses, which give you what they might call an Easter egger. Those are the ones that are going to be giving you your blues and your greens. All right, so here's some examples of what those breeds, if you're looking for egg layers, are going to give you as far as colors. Again, we talked about prolific egg layers being the Mediterranean. You're going to get on average 250 to 280 eggs per year. All of the Mediterranean breeds, so all those that we just talked about, they're going to be laying your white colored eggs. Okay, so your Leghorns, Hamburgs, Campines, those ones that we talked about are going to be your white colored eggs. Your Asiatic and most American breeds are going to be into the browns, okay? And they will vary. Sometimes like your Wyandottes are going to be more of a cream color. Let me find a Wyandotte egg right here. So it's kind of a lighter color, if you can see that type of a brown, okay? And then you might get some that are more of a dark color, and these would be more of your copper Morans, well Summers, those types of breeds, just a little bit darker there, okay? One of the things that that's interesting is these types of chickens, they are bred to lay, so they don't need much feed to maintain muscle mass, but they do need feed to be able to produce those eggs and maintain their health and their body weight. So here in the middle here, this is a picture of a Andalusian. She's actually a lighter colored one. We really like her. She's really, really pretty. And then the one next to her is what they call an olive egger, okay? And so you can see this really dark kind of army green egg that's here in this diagram. An olive egger is generally a cross between a Moran and a Americana, okay? So again, you've got your Americana that's more of a blue, your Araucana that's more of a green. You can cross those two, those Morans and Americanas, to get those really dark eggs. And so I know, like, for example, at the feed stores right now, you can go and purchase an olive egger and you're going to get a darker green colored egg just like that, okay? These are some eggs from our house that just gives you an idea of the different colors. All of these hens were bought as pullets from a local feed store. So again, if you just pay attention maybe to this diagram here and you're thinking about colors of eggs that you'd really like, that'll tell you what kind of pullets that you would like to buy. One thing that I failed to mention, I keep referring to pullets. Pullets are female chicks. So those are the ones that you're going to want to focus on if you're worried about egg production. If you get a cockerel is a male chick. Now, sometimes you'll go to the feed store and they'll say these are pullets, and sometimes you'll pay just a little bit more, but generally they get pretty good. They're about 90, I think it's about 96 to 99% accurate in sexing the chicks, and so you're going to get a pretty good guarantee that you're buying a female. If you get to the store and they say this is a straight run, the straight run means that there's going to be, they haven't sexed them and you're just kind of paying for a gamble in what you might get as far as cockerels or pullets. So you want to make sure that you keep that in mind and make sure you're asking that whomever you're getting them from, whether you're getting a straight run or whether you're going to get some pullets, okay? All right, the other thing that's really fun and something that we haven't went over some of the standard breeds that are available, but there's an abundance of new breeds that are out there. So this one right here, again, we talked about, we saw her in the previous slide. This is the olive egger. This hen right here is actually one that they call a midnight Moran. So she lays darker brown eggs. They're not as chocolate or dark as maybe the full Moran, but they tend to be a lot more prolific. So they're mixing things, they're creating some new breeds, and they're offering them. So you might go to the feed store or look in the catalog and find a bunch of really exciting things that you might want to try. So pay attention to all the different things that are coming out and being made available. There again, each year I get excited to see what types of new things the hatcheries are working on. So Brandy has a really good question. She asks if there's any nutritional difference between white eggs versus the other colors. It's a really good question, Brandy, and the answer is no. The eggs all have the same type of nutrition. It's simply just what they call a bloom, and the bloom is what deciphers the color on the eggs. So they all have the same nutritional value, especially from the farm. The chickens are eating the same type of nutrition that you're feeding them. They're producing those same types of eggs. Good question. All right, so here's some bantams. These again are tiny little chickens. They might weigh about 1 or 2 pounds. Okay, this little bantam right here, she's an Old English. They're my favorite types of bantams. They're really, really cute, and the roosters are also beautiful. But we have bantams in just about every breed of chicken. So they've been able to breed them really small, and they stay really small. Now remember, again, if you're going to the feed store, you're ordering the catalog, make sure that you're getting what you're asking for. So don't be buying bantams and thinking you're going to get full-size laying hens. Just make sure that you pay close attention to how they're labeled. Generally, bantam chicks are visibly quite small, so you ought to be able to tell that way. But if they're all together and they're all a bunch of bantams, you might not be able to tell the difference. So just be very careful in what you're getting. I've had some people. In fact, I was looking online in one of the chicken groups on Facebook last night, and somebody said, we thought this was a bantam, and it's definitely not a bantam. And they had a great big cockerel that they had. And so you just want to make sure that you're getting what you would like. So we have a question right here that says, I've got 2 groups of chicks about 2 weeks in age apart. How soon can I put them together? Jennifer, you actually ought to be okay to put them together. Just make sure that your space in your brooder is big enough that they can move around and get to know one another, and still have adequate heat sources for them. So you should be okay. 2 weeks is not a huge difference. If they were a month or a month and a half apart, you would worry about that pecking order and having issues there, but you should be okay with 2 weeks. I would watch them carefully just to make sure somebody isn't getting picked on. But generally, when they're that young and they only have that type of an age difference, it's not that big of a deal. Good question. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the coop. So this is our coop that we have here in Bear River City, and it's nothing fancy by any means, but we sure love it. It serves its purpose. But one of the things that we wanted to talk about is that chickens are very adaptable. Okay, and no single house suits them best. Okay, so again, I've seen coops that look like the Taj Mahal. I've seen coops that look like a racehorse from Kentucky could live in them. But there's a couple of things, regardless of the design, that I wanted to go over really quickly that makes sense for what you're going to want to be doing here. So the building must be large enough for proper air circulation, okay, but small enough to keep it from getting too drafty and cold in the winter. On average, you want to allow for about 1 to 2 square feet of floor space per adult chicken, okay, and you need to provide easy access to feed and water. You also need to provide nesting areas, and I'm going to show you a couple examples of what that looks like for your egg production. And then you want to be aware of predators. So make sure that you're building a coop and a run. We'll talk about what a run is. That's going to keep your predators out, whether it's a neighbor's dog, whether it's a cat if they're a younger chicken, foxes, raccoons, coyotes, all sorts of different things that can be predators. You want to be mindful of that. What we've ended up doing ultimately, because we have a lot of skunks and raccoons and things here, is we put our coop and our run actually on concrete, and then we've put dirt and other things on the top of that, so the chickens can still dust bathe and scratch and do whatever they'd like to do, but we aren't having things digging underneath the coop to try and get in it. We do live in the country. We have a lot of predators though, and so sometimes it's just as simple enough as having a stable situation and setup. The other thing that I would advise all of you is make sure that you have easy access to being able to clean your coop. So whether that's being able to take off paneling, being able to open it up easily, coops need to be cleaned to prevent disease and spread of mites and lice and other things that might come about. And so you just need to be very careful to be able to have easy access. I've seen some really cool coops, but they end up not having the access that's needed to be able to clean them.
Josh, we do have a question in the chat.
Okay.
Is it important to get greens in their diet if they have picked their coop area clean, Besides layering pellets, what should they be getting? It's from Tana.
All right, Tana, thank you. Thank you, Ginger. Tana, that's a really good question. Greens in their diet don't hurt. It's always a fun little treat for them. However, if you are buying a total mixed ration pellet, a laying pellet, that really ought to be sufficient for their diets. However, it's always okay to be like we like to throw our maybe some of our salad that's getting old in the fridge. We like to give that to them. It's just a treat for them. But generally, if you're buying an actual laying pellet from a feed store, it ought to have all of the required nutrients there for them. That's a really good question. All right, so perches, here's an example in your coop of what you can have as far as perches. They're not mandatory, but chickens like to roost, and that's getting up on a perch at night. And so most breeds, again, they seem to enjoy this. We'll have a chicken or two, even though we have adequate space in our coop, that don't like to be on the perch. They'll sit at the bottom of the coop, or they'll sit on the middle layer of the coop and not jump up on a perch, but most of them tend to like to do it. A good rule of thumb is you want to allow about 6 to 10 inches of linear space per perch or per chicken on the perch. So as you're building those perches or thinking about your chicken coop space, those are some things that you're going to want to consider. So here's a picture of Knox. This is at Easter time. You can see the Easter bunny thought it would be a good idea to put some of the Easter eggs, including one of the golden eggs, inside of the nesting boxes. But one of the things when it comes to nesting boxes that I recommend, it's not necessary, but if you've got kids and you're excited to have them be a part of the chicken project, make it so that those nesting boxes are easily accessible. So here in our coop, you don't have to go inside the run or the coop to be able to get those eggs. There's just two doors that open right up, and you can grab those eggs right out of the nesting boxes there. So that's just something to consider. There are some nesting boxes that you can actually push up. You may be able to lift on a hinge some of the to gather the eggs there. Those work just fine. But as you're developing or building your coop, just think about easy accessibility to those nesting boxes. Okay.
Josh, we have about 10 minutes left.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that warning. One nest box is required for about 4 to 5 hens. What's really interesting that you'll find, like with ours, we have about 20 hens, and they choose one box. So we'll get all the eggs in one box. They have the options, but they just tend to like to lay in the one. And so that's just something funny that chickens will do. But that's just on average about how many nesting boxes you would like. If you don't have that many made available to them, sometimes they'll lay on the ground somewhere else, and you'll wonder where your eggs are, and then you'll find them in the inside of the coop on the ground somewhere. So it's generally advised to do that. Then you're going to want to maintain cleanliness of the eggs. So make sure that you have 2 to 3 inches of those dry shavings in each of the nest box to reduce the breakage of the eggs and soilage on them. Okay, we've got a question about pecking at eggs before we get them. How do you stop that? So it's really hard. If you've got a chicken that's pecking and eating the eggs, it's really hard to break them of that. In fact, I have found most of the time, if I've got a hen that's doing that and I know who she is, I need to cull her from the flock before she teaches others those bad habits. Some people have talked about like maybe putting in a fake egg or a rock or something like that they peck out and get tired of trying to get the egg contents from. You can try that, but generally if you've got one that's doing that, what'll end up happening again is a learned behavior. They all like to eat the eggs, they'll get in there and they'll start doing that together, and then it can go downhill really quickly from there. So Tanya, I'd recommend that you make sure to try and find that one, maybe cull it out, maybe put it in a different place, see if it learns its lesson. If it doesn't, you're gonna definitely not want to put it back in there. I've learned from sad experience personally on that. So that's a good question. Height of perches, it really doesn't matter. You want them to be probably a foot at least off the ground, because they're naturally going to defecate during the night and the times that they're on that perch. So you just want enough room there that they're not going to be soiling themselves because there's not enough room for that poop to drop down. Okay. You got another question about trimming claws if they get long enough. Normally with their scratching and whatnot, you're not going to see that problem. You might see roosters that are going to have a spur, but on average, if they're out able to scratch, they're going to keep those claws down. So maybe even throwing some chicken scratch out there on the ground to allow them to be able to scratch and peck and kind of naturally wear those claws down just a little bit. Marjorie Clark asked if there's special considerations for selecting a breed of chicken for the southern Utah heat. Most of the Mediterranean breeds, Marjorie, are good because they come from that region of heat. So like your Leghorns, your Blue Andalusians, those types of Mediterranean breeds that we talked about, they're pretty hardy in both cold and hot. Some of the other specialty or novelty breeds that we have, they end up maybe being a little more stressed. They can survive, but they might not thrive as far as egg production is concerned. All right, Kara says, I'm considering adopting two 2-year-old red sex-link hens to bring into my flock of 4 hens. What do you know about this breed? Is it a good idea to bring 2 groups of mature birds together? So the red sex-link is a what they call a hybrid chicken, and so they've actually taken and done some crossing to try and get more prolific egg layers. The sex-link is a very common breed. When we talked about those new breeds that are always coming out, it's been around for quite a few years, and it's a very prolific egg layer. So that would be good to bring them into your flock. They are very hardy. They're very good laying chickens. And if you bring 2 groups of mature birds together, you're going to do a pecking order issue. You're going to have some things that happen there. They're going to naturally decide who it is that's the running boss of the coop. And so one of the things that's recommended is either putting a divider fence like we talked about and letting them try and work out their differences for a couple of days in between the fence. The other thing that's advised when you do put them together, adult chickens, is actually put them together at night. There's something about them being together at night when they're roosting and then waking up in the morning and finding out that they have new roommates that tends to lessen the fighting and the blow. So hopefully that helps you there. Good questions. All right, here is just a quick rundown on the feed like we talked about. The meat types, you're going to be starting at a 20 to 24% protein. And because the quick way that they grow and the fact that you'll want them to fatten just a little bit and not grow as much skeletally, you're going to want to go from that 24% down to about an 18 to 20% finisher when you get to that point. Your layers, you're going to start out until they get to about 6 weeks prior to egg production, and then you're going to move them down to protein pullet grower or developer. And then when they're on their laying cycles, you're going to want to have them on a 16 to 18% protein layer diet. Now, you can get the pellets in that form, or you can get the crumble. It's whatever you prefer. We tend to like to use pellets at our place because they tend to not waste as much feed. You can see right here, we've made our own little feeder out of a 4-inch PVC, did a cutting job out of it and put some ends on the feeder. And that's just a homemade thing. You can buy some really fancy ones at your local feed store. But where we have a lot of chickens, again, I said we on average have about 20 in our coop. That's kind of what we utilize there to make sure that we have enough feed in front of them. You have dual purpose breeds. The dual purpose we didn't talk too much about earlier, but that would be a meat and a laying hen together. They generally have about the same requirements as your layers. Okay.
We have about 3 minutes left, Josh.
Okay, thank you. I'll hurry. Again, we talked about feeding recommendations. You can do the mash, you can do the crumbles, you can do pellets. One of the things you need to be able to have available is what they call grit. That's how chickens actually digest their food. So we like to get this little rocks. You can find them at your local feed store, and then we'll put them down so that they can peck and scratch on the ground. We'll sometimes throw some chicken scratch, which is just some mixed grains out just to give them some extra things to peck at and to eat. But we don't want to feed too much scratch because we want them to be getting the primary diet from that total mixed ration of their pellets. Okay. And then the other thing that you might consider getting, you can buy these again at a local feed store, even on Amazon, is some oyster shells. These are just a boost of calcium that will help to fortify the egg shell when it's being developed by the chicken, okay? This is my daughter Kix. She calls that little thing there the egg getter, but you can see that she goes out and she collects those eggs. One of the things I want to talk to you about egg production is there's a lot of wives' tales out there about all the things that you need to do to make your chickens lay, but the biggest thing is lighting. So as we get into the fall and winter months, if you would like to continue to have your chickens lay, you're going to want to make sure that you have proper lighting for them and that they're getting a recommended 16 hours of daylight. So oftentimes we will wire timers into our coop so that there is light that's extending the daylight on the short term of days. For that 16-hour period, you'll find that your production continues to stay on track, and you'll be ready to go that way, okay? Another thing that's really interesting is it's important to note that hens do not need a rooster present to produce eggs, okay? So if you do have a rooster present, that's just fine, and you can have your fertilized eggs. We have a rooster now, and we have a lot of people that like to get the eggs and incubate them and do whatever, but you definitely don't need one to be in egg production. Keeping things clean. I got a question last night from a homesteader there in Tooele. They said that they think that they had found some mites or some lice on their chickens, and as they send me pictures, that was what we found. Now, some people say, well, I keep my coop clean and I'm still finding issues. Well, we sometimes can get those types of pests coming in on the backs of a sparrow or a smaller bird that's flying in and rummaging around in our coop that's got it from another coop from somewhere else. The best thing that you can do is do a thorough clean of your coop. And then I like to use the permethrin dust. There's all sorts of different brands and kinds that you can use, but I recommend that you dust your coop at least this time of year just to try and prevent those mites and the stress that they cause on your chickens. The other thing that you can do with that dust is grab them and lightly dust that around their vent, which is where their eggs come out, okay, their bottom, their vent. You lightly dust around there, or you can lift up their wings too and lightly dust around there. Be careful not to get it around their eyes or their face or their nose, but that will help to prevent them from getting mites. And if they have them, that will help to treat them for it. So just a really nice option to keep things clean. The feces of the chickens is where those types of bugs can thrive, and you just got to keep your coop looking nice. Okay, we've talked about this a little bit already about how they'll start to lay about 5 to 7 months old. A good hen will lay about 20 dozen eggs their first year, so that's a lot, right? And then you can expect a hen to molt when they're about 18 months old. And a molt is when they go through and they lose their feathers and they go through a regrowth. Okay, this is normal. When they do this, they're resetting and they're taking care of themselves, and they'll probably go off of laying for about 2 months. Okay, while they're going back through this molt. No worries, this is a natural thing, and they'll start back up into egg production once they get through that. This is an example of what we call brooding, okay? Sometimes we'll get some breeds that like to be more broody than others, but when a hen wants to be broody, she wants to start setting on a nest of eggs. When she goes into this phase, she stops laying, and she can also be really ornery, okay? So your kids might go out and say, oh, she's broody, I don't want to get the eggs because she's trying to peck at me. Oftentimes, if you don't want a hen to be broody, you can put them in a separate type of a pen or a cage for a couple of days, providing food and water away from the eggs, and they'll tend to snap out of that broodiness. We've had some that we can do that time and time again, and they just want to be broody all the time. So we either decide to let them be broody and hatch out a clutch of eggs, or we cull them from the flock just because they cause more problems than what we're asking them to do. Okay, again, lighting is key. There's an example. This is from Andrea Walker Bravo, picture of her coop there in the winter months. And then the other thing I wanted to quickly bring to your attention is some of our resources that we have from USU. So sometimes we talk about disease prevention, mite prevention, those types of things. We have some really good information that you can find at usu.edu. These, like, for example, is a backyard poultry biosecurity paper that talks about some things you can do to keep your chickens safe from disease. We also have a backyard chicken course that's available. So you can go through and learn even more in depth than the things that we've already talked about today. And that's by Dr. Melanie Stock and Dr. David Frame. And Dr. Frame is actually our poultry veterinarian and specialist, and he is brilliant. And so there's lots of really good, more in-depth information that you can find by going to extension.usu.edu/poultry.